This is Living It Up in Lion City.
Hello and welcome to yet another awesome episode of Living Up in Lion City, a podcast about Singapore, yada 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 yada. Now, in this particular episode, we have a guest who is a stranger that I met on the internet, from the internet.
Stranger danger. This is always how this is the start of every bad story.
Yep.
I guess.
Just get me now.
Actually, I shouldn't say that because I met my wife online. So.
Quick side note, do you remember the time when meeting online was considered weird?
Yeah, I mean it's like one of those things. Don't get into cars with strangers. Don't take candy from a van, and don't meet strangers on the internet. Those were the days.
It was a different time.
Yeah, it was a very different time. I guess now people are more discerning towards people online. I mean, you have a kind of especially for me, I have some sort of vetting process to kind of make sure that the other person is real, something like that.
Which is something that I've forgotten about. When I was active on dating apps.
Oh my goodness, that is. I've been there. I know what you mean.
But I do remember that I used to be a champion of dating apps. So, before dating apps, even dating websites in general. There was Match.com, OkCupid.com, and I remember people. And this was in the last few years in India, where on top of online dating being a stigma, dating was also a stigma.
Yeah.
Right. So they'd be like, "Why are you doing this?" And I'm like, "No, man, it's the future. That's supposed to be." But yeah, that's all good.
And here we are.
Yeah.
I mean, two strangers meeting.
So, guys who are listening, a bit of context. A lot of what we've been talking about in our podcast has always been about narratives about Singapore and all that. And my co-host Raj and I stumbled upon the Malay Annals, which turned out to be fascinating, amazing reading. Please, guys, get an edition of the Malay Annals and have a go at it. While talking about this and discussing, narratives about Singapore on Reddit, I've managed to have some really interesting conversations with fellow Redditors. One of them is sitting right across from me.
Yes.
Hafiz, welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you, Reddit. Right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I saw what you were posting. You posted comics, and I suppose somehow somewhere I actually found out that you did podcasts also, and you spoke about the Malay Annals. And it was you who messaged me saying that you did a podcast, didn't you?
So what I did was, I think somebody was asking about, and they were asking about Sangila Uttama or something.
Yeah.
And so that's when I stepped into the comments saying that, hey, this is what I learned from this particular thing and all that. And that's when you were like, oh, this is an interesting topic. And then I was like, by the way, here's the podcast.
Very nice way to
I segued into that shit.
But it was fascinating. I listened to it the whole way, and I just felt that it was very interesting to actually hear a different perspective of it from someone who's not Singaporean.
Right.
I mean, I just felt that it's such a waste that not many Singaporeans actually have read the Malay Annals, and they don't really know where the stories of Sang Nila Utama, the story about Hang Nadim, where the story about the swordfish attacking Singapore came from. So I mean, it's a lost opportunity to actually teach about this part of Singapore's history. It's not just the history of Singapore, but also the history about the region. Yeah. So I found that very interesting to me, and that is why I actually went into that the whole research into the Malay Annals, as well as other Malay literature that was from the past, from 1800s and earlier. Okay. And it's such a waste that we don't actually have that many Malay literature. And I can actually say that part of the reason is also Raffles. there was when he was actually returning from Singapore to Britain. He had a lot of original Malay manuscripts back with him.
Right.
I suppose he wanted to conserve it, but his ship got fired midway, and a lot of the manuscripts got lost.
Wow.
So it is such a waste. Munshi Abdullah actually wrote about it, and it's one of Malay literature greatest tragedies. I feel that a lot of these stories get lost because of Raffles.
What are these manuscripts? Are these works of fiction, historical chronicles?
A lot of it. That's what we don't really know because it was hauled into his ship in crates.
Okay.
There was like literally huge crates that he brought over with manuscripts. Some of them rolled, some of them bound. Since they're manuscripts, they're all like handwritten and stuff, and it's lost. It's lost to time. It's lost. I suppose a lot of it are stories like just normal stories. A lot of Malay writers. There used to be an exhibition in National Library about some of the writings of the Malay people back then.
Yeah.
There was not that many, but it was interesting because it showed how Malay people lived back then. It's not just it's not just about like what people were doing, but also how they treated each other.
Yeah.
And it's pretty interesting to me. I mean that's quite a tangent, but we lost quite a lot when his ship burned, and he was saved. His wife was saved, but everything else was lost.
Oh, that sucks. Curious. So Munshi Abdullah, and once again, all the information that I know about these figures literally came from the SG Bicentennial page, right? I just want to quickly talk to you about that Facebook page. As a foreigner, I found that page very interesting and I've mentioned this in a previous podcast episode where, as foreigners, like the only narrative that we generally know, and this is like narratives that we learn through osmosis, right? Is that, Raffles came along, Singapore is founded, all is well good, right? And, we never had any reason to question otherwise. I mean, we have other things to do with our lives, right? It's only with this SG Bicentennial that I'm starting to realize that, these guys are actually taking a different tack this time where they're talking about, hey, there's more to the story.
Yeah.
Now, I took a special interest in this particular story because as an Indian, I have a special place in my heart for hating on colonialism.
I understand,
I do understand that colonialism is looked upon very differently here in Singapore. And I've talked about this, with my brother in a previous podcast, with my friends too, and I generally feel that, the way that colonialism manifested itself in Singapore is very different from how it is in India.
Mm-hmm.
Here it is more of a nation building thing, whereas in India it was considered exploitative.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I'm coming from. And also our history books tend to lionize the struggle that Indian nationalists had to go through to get freedom from the British powers. So I grew up with the notion that British bad, and then I come to Singapore and it's like, oh, British are good. And so when this SG Bicentennial Facebook page came about saying that, hey, you know what? Raffles is probably very towards the bad end of the spectrum. And I'm like, yes, let's see what that deal is, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think what's going on is there's a push towards kind of like decolonizing or making our education less focused on that colonization by the British.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess over the years it got kind of like drilled into us that colonialism is good. I mean, they helped us, they helped build and everything. But more and more, when we dig, we find that there's a lot of trade, a lot of merchants. There was a lot of different castes of people, people who are actually pretty rich, locals who did trade between India and China.
Yep.
So these are all the things that are kind of glossed over or not talked about in previous history books. And I'm just glad that now with the SG Bicentennial, I mean, some people are still cynical, saying that no, 200 years since Raffles came, it's still about colonialism and stuff. But I think they're missing the trees for the woods or something like that.
Okay.
I mean, I guess it's just an opportune moment where it's 200 years since colonialism, but look at how far back we've come.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things that happened between then, and we're still finding out new artifacts in digs and archaeological digs and stuff. So I mean, it's not just about that 200 years of since Raffles came to Singapore, but what happened when he came, who were there, what are the roles of locals in building Singapore. It's not just the British came and built everything. The British are good. So I mean, it's definitely worth looking into the locals, see what they were doing, how they viewed the colonialists, and one very good account of how it was back then was from Munshi Abdullah, because he's a teacher. He's born in Penang.
Okay.
And he's born in Penang. He used to work for Raffles, and when Raffles came to Singapore, he also came down to Singapore. So he has like a first-hand account of all these characters: Raffles, Farquhar, the Sultan in Singapore, which is a very interesting story because you seldom hear about this.
Yeah.
You kind of like know what Raffles looked like, but how was he? How was Farquhar? I mean, how was he seen by his by the locals? And we actually get to see that a lot of people liked Farquhar back then. When Farquhar left, there was a huge crowd at the bay actually waving him off.
Really?
And they were actually sad. Yeah, he wrote all of this down. And it's such a waste that we are, we're celebrating Raffles for what he did, but people actually liked, even back then people liked Farquhar more.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
It's pretty interesting. If you could, you should definitely look for the Abdullah's Chronicles, Hikayat Abdullah.
Are Munshi Abdullah's Chronicles available?
Yes, you can actually look it up in the library. I'm not sure whether you're able to access it, but you can actually loan the books.
Okay.
I thought it would be in Malay because he wrote in Malay,
Right.
but it's actually translated in English. So
Okay.
It's definitely something that you could dive into straight away.
I
It's
definitely,
really good.
want to check it out because I've been listening to podcasts about a criticism of Bicentennial, and a lot of it talks about like how this is a big marketing push. There was a podcast that I was listening to a couple of weeks ago, and the guest in that podcast was a lady who runs tours here. And she runs tours here, and then she had this interesting story about how Farquhar is often relegated to the back pages of history simply because when Raffles passed away, his wife refused to let people forget Raffles. So she apparently wrote a book.
Yeah.
There was apparently a big, massive marketing push.
It's a
at the
PR
time.
push back then. Yeah, basically.
So and like from what she said and what I gathered was that apparently Raffles' book at that time was the Harry Potter of its time. So everyone's like, "Oh, Raffles, amazing!" And it's a testament to how amazing that PR was because 200 years hence, he is still considered the founder of modern Singapore, right? Questions about Farquhar and why he's been forgotten and all that aside, why is it that Munshi Abdullah, Narayan Pillai, Tan Tock Seng, why are these guys being highlighted right now? It goes back to what you said about, hey, it's the 200th year of Raffles coming in. While this is supposedly a celebration of colonialism, this also gives us an opportunity to do some self-introspection.
Yes, exactly.
Like to question the narrative or just say that, hey, let's think about what really happened, if you could be swayed by a PR marketing push from 200 years ago, what else could have happened? Right?
Exactly. So yeah, it's worth a look. It's very good that they highlighted this for people, but definitely, if you can try look for more sources, and I couldn't recommend enough Hikayat Abdullah because it's just well written, especially Malay. I think you can actually get the Malay version of it online. You can actually read it, and it's so well written. I was actually taken aback when I first read it many years ago. It was it came from like a humble beginnings kind of story where he wrote down that he might not be the most knowledgeable person. The stories that he written might have many errors, but the way that he wrote it's just beautiful, and there's a reason for this because he, unlike most people back then, especially Malays back then, who thought that Malay is easy, and he absolutely hated that notion that being Malay it shouldn't be hard to learn Malay.
Quick question.
Yeah.
The notion that Malay is easy. Where did that notion come from?
It's I've no idea where it came from, but that was what he wrote. That was what he wrote. That a lot of his peers, a lot of his friends were saying that it's easy to learn, and just because they're Malay, you shouldn't be pursuing learning your own language because it's your own language.
I see.
So that's what that's how people thought back then, and he was definitely very against it. And he actually went through the rigors of listing down all the different Malay idioms, and how to use Malay grammatically correctly. So he's very meticulous in that sense. Exactly.
Doing the second, right?
Yeah, but as a matter of fact, he's actually not Malay. He's actually Indian. He's someone wrote about him saying that he's from Tamil.
Right.
His ancestors were of Tamil descent.
Right.
So he was born in Malaysia.
Right.
I think his grandfather was from India.
Right.
So that's he was born in Malaysia, but he himself identified himself as Malay, and he was really he was to the point of being pedantic towards his friend. When his friends said something that's wrong grammatically, and he would just correct the guy, and he gave no shits about it.
Really?
He was quite a pedantic person.
Hafiz, I wonder if it's the case of there's something called the zeal of the convert.
Oh yeah, maybe. Yeah.
So it's like if someone's recently converted to something, they're like,
no,
go all in.
you gotta do it right. This is how you do it right. Maybe that's what it was. But
interesting. Okay,
yeah, but his work is really really beautiful. There were because he wrote it some years after everything happened. I think he wrote it in 1830s or something.
Okay.
And he was writing it writing about stories from 1819 when Raffles came, and before that, in Penang also he wrote about how he was raised and stuff. He wrote really well, especially Malay. The way that he wrote is it really felt like he was alive, like he was telling you stories about what's happening right now. That Fatwa was here. Like it's such an interesting window into the past.
Right.
It really brings a past right here to you at this moment. So you get a sense of how the people were. You get it. He describes really well how people behaved, what they wore. He wrote he wrote very strongly about the Sultan, which he didn't like, because it's a very interesting excerpt where he actually wrote that the Sultan used to be very skinny, and after the British came and gave him so much money, he actually grew so fat. He's never seen anyone as fat as he was back then, and he was very critical of the Sultan back then.
I see.
That's a I mean there's a huge part in his book where he talks about how the Sultan was greedy, and he basically got played by the second resident, John Crawford, who was after Farquhar in Singapore.
Okay.
It's very interesting. It chronicles how the Sultan's basically lost all power due to his greed and his penchant for women and for just spending his money away. Yeah.
I mean, this is not a story that uncommon with a lot of the provinces in India, as far as the British colonialists coming in. They're like, check this out.
Yeah.
Look at all that money. Look at all the women.
Exactly. It's a common thread where a lot of these people get played by the colonial powers. It's just nuts. I thought.
Quick question about the second president. I had no idea.
Yeah,
I've always thought it's about Stamford Raffles and William Farquhar.
Yeah.
Who is John Crawford?
John Crawford was the second resident after Farquhar, and he was tasked to realize Singapore in the manner that he wanted it, because Raffles and Farquhar had a very well-known spat or argument about how Singapore should be run. So he sent Farquhar back, and John Crawford took over.
Okay.
And he was really very how do I put it? He's very good at what he does in terms of like trying to bring order and realize the vision of Raffles to build Singapore as a colonial outpost. He was really smart. He was really smart, and I'm not sure if you want to hear about the story about the Sultan.
Go for it. Like, all
so,
the information.
so basically, for the Sultan, he was he has his right hand man Temenggung. Both of them were receiving like $800 or $1,000 back then. Was a huge sum of money.
Just to clarify, this Sultan is the Sultan of Singapore.
Sultan of Singapore, Sultan Hussein Shah, I think.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I might need to fact check that, but I think it's Sultan Hussein Shah.
Okay.
Yeah, and he and Temenggung is his basically his prime minister. Both of them received about $800 to $1,000 back then, and he pieces it all away every time, and he spends his money. I'm not sure. It's just a lot of food, a lot of women.
Okay.
Basically,
he was living it up.
He was really living it up. He
living up in Lion City.
he didn't make use of it for like building his own power or anything. It was just he's enjoying his life, and for a while. John Crawford stopped his payments for a while, and the Sultan and Temenggung went over to John Crawford and asked why the payment stopped, and he was saying that there was some trouble with the colony, and they needed to postpone the payment. So he went back, he spent some more money, he goes in debt, and then after a while he came back to John Crawford and said that this can't go on. We need more money. And then John Crawford cut a deal. He says that he would give him more money, but you would have to give up some of your lands and basically relinquish his power that he has, whatever power that he has. And happily, the Sultan went back with Temenggung and thought that sounds like a good deal. More money for me. And what happened was that he he came back. He agreed to the deal, and then I think it was the next month. Um, what happened was that John Crawford basically took a huge cut from whatever that he was supposed to give the Sultan because of all the debt that he racked up. And
Okay.
yeah, so basically they left with very little. They had to move out some of his people, and he lost a lot of power during that time. So it was pretty crazy.
Yeah.
He was really angry, but he realized that he doesn't have any more power, and an interesting thing happened many months after, where there were girls running out the compound, the royal grounds,
Right.
to the police and saying that they've been abused. This guy does all sorts of weird shit to these girls. I think he pours like hot water and stuff. Yeah, so
Wow,
he was
okay.
being pretty cruel to his harem of girls. So
Okay, so it's not like a fetish. It's more like
yeah,
this is so sadist.
yeah. So what John Crawford did was he went to the compound while the Sultan wasn't there. He released all the girls, and the Sultan was understandably very very upset. And he came to John Crawford, and asked what he did to his girls. And what Crawford said was that because the British Empire doesn't recognize slaves, so these people are actually free to go. So yeah, and they can't.
I want to back that, but okay.
Yeah, so that's what he said, and that's what happened. He couldn't do anything, and he was so upset. John Crawford was so angry at the Sultan that just to show his power, what he did was he constructed a road right through the royal grounds, which is something that you can actually see right now if you go to the what do you call it, Malay Heritage Center. Malay Heritage Center is where the Sultan used to stay.
Right. Where is this
Yes.
Malay Heritage Center
It's
again?
if you're in Bugis, it's near the Sultan Mosque. The Sultan
Right.
Mosque,
Okay.
that whole area used to be the royal grounds.
Okay.
So just to show power, he cut a road right through, and the front, what was it? I think he basically cut the road through, and the Sultan didn't have any recourse. He couldn't do anything to stop that.
Wow.
And yeah, I mean, over the years, I'm sure you've seen a lot of shop houses there.
Yeah.
He sold off his property. He sold off his lands, and little by little, his own territory got reduced to such a small size.
Did he still retain the title of Sultan of Singapore?
Yeah, but I think what happened to him was in the end he left. He left
Right.
Singapore to go to Johor or something. I can't remember. But yeah, he basically became a footnote in Singapore's history as someone who just lost all his power to the British.
All because of innocuous habits like pouring hot water on the Yeah.
It's crazy. It's crazy. I mean,
Nothing good can come of that thing.
yeah, nothing good.
Wow. And
It's very crazy.
Was this story like chronicled by Munshi Abdullah?
Yes, it's
Okay.
all in his book. He writes about all these characters. How
I'm sure he enjoyed writing that episode, right? Seeing how he probably
Yeah.
hates the Sultan. It's like,
Yeah,
good riddance, fucker.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there was some criticism about Munshi Abdullah. People were saying that he was the Talibarot of the British, which is like because of his writing being favorable towards the British and not towards the
Right.
Sultans. But I think recently, as people studied, he was
That's it.
yeah, as people studied his works, they found that he was not just being favorable, but he was critical in parts. That there were parts where he was because of Malay, we write in layers. Some meaning might have been lost
Right.
when people were reading it, and there were. I'm not sure how to translate this word sindir. Sindir is to like how do you say it? Like you say one thing but you mean the other. What's that?
Double entendre.
It's a slight. It's like
Right, okay.
you're trying to slight another person by saying something else. Yeah.
Right.
So there were a couple of instances of him doing that, and it just shows that he's trying to write whatever that he saw, what he felt, and I mean the criticism goes both ways towards the locals as well as also the colonialists.
Right. Just quickly want to talk about. Oh, sorry. Yeah, you wanted to say
There was also an interesting story I think in the Hikayat where I think it was Farquhar who got stabbed. Nobody ever talked about it, but he was stabbed once by a man who ran amok, and they managed to find him and kill this guy. I'm just surprised that nobody actually ever talked about it.
Like, what was the beef between this guy and
I
Farquhar?
think the guy just went crazy for some reason. There was no he didn't write about any reason. It just that this guy went amok and stabbed someone.
I mean, people don't talk about Farquhar anyway, so you must understand it.
So this guy just got caught and they killed him, and I think they hung him somewhere. In public. So that was justice back then. That's how it was served. Yeah.
Swiftly.
Yeah.
What was
very interesting?
So what was Munshi Abdullah's role in early Singapore? Like, he came with Raffles, sure.
Yeah.
What was his role in all of this?
He teaches Malay to a lot of the major players in that time.
Right.
He helped Raffles with Malay. He taught a lot of he basically taught Malay to a lot of the colonials when they came.
Right.
So he also did a lot of I'm not sure whether he did it in Singapore, but he wrote he helped to write letters, correspondence.
Okay. So, translator.
Yeah, correct. He kind of like
emissary between possibly the royalty at the time with the Britishers. Okay, interesting.
So, but yeah, he was present all the way to write about what was happening back then. It was
What is his book about? Is it just a chronicle of Singapore? Was it like a slice of life of Singapore in the 1820s?
Yeah, it was a chronicle of his life. He was encouraged to write the book by a priest, basically, because back then they were bringing printing presses to Singapore, and a lot of them were trying to actually print books. A lot of priests wanted to print Bibles in Malay, basically.
Right.
So he helped to translate that, and because of what he's gone through, one of these priests actually told him that you should actually write a book about what you've seen, what you've heard and stuff. So basically, because of this priest, we have this book about the life of this man.
Wow.
This teacher, yeah.
Okay.
It was very interesting. I mean, it's during that time where printing presses were coming to Singapore.
Yep.
There was a lot of printing happening, and it's there's that leap when people stop using manuscripts, people stop writing and start printing and mass producing books and stuff. So it was an interesting time looking at how he wrote about that time. So yeah,
I mean, it's great because we don't hear about slices of life from that time. It's often hard to find information of this sort. Is Munshi Abdullah's account the only one of its kind? Are there other local accounts?
That's the thing. I've not found anything written by locals about that time. So I might be mistaken, but as far as I can tell, I found no other written accounts by a local
Right.
who's gone through all this.
That possibly most of them probably didn't survive that
Yeah,
fire.
exactly. That fire.
Fucking Raffles. It's all his fault.
Yeah, he brought along quite a lot of stuff. Not just books but also artifacts. Yeah.
If I remember correctly, the original Malay Annals was in a British museum.
Yeah.
And it's now back here on display.
No, it's the one that's on display is the first print of it's the first print. It's also been worked on by Munshi Abdullah. He basically looked at 6 different manuscripts.
Right.
Because there was many different. I think there's 32 known manuscripts that are still around in the world, and what Munshi Abdullah did was he managed to find 6 manuscripts, and he basically writes. He basically wrote about the Malay annals. He transcribed it and made it into print form.
Okay.
So he collated 6 of the manuscripts, one of which is the oldest known Raffles MS-18.
Okay.
I think that was dated 1500s, 1600s. So
Right.
it's pretty old, and the one that's in display right now is that print, the first print of Munshi Abdullah's version of the Malay Annals.
I see.
Yeah.
I see.
Because before that everything was handwritten, copied down by hand. Yeah. So this is one of the ways.
Copy pasting was slightly difficult back
Yeah,
then.
yeah. This was one of the ways that he helped with printing in Singapore. He basically wanted to make the Malay annals something that a lot of people he wanted a lot of people to read it. Basically, that's why he did it.
I mean, a great
found-
story is worth sharing.
Yeah, he found that not just for the stories but also for the language being used. Yeah.
Okay. Right.
So he didn't want that to be lost to time. So that's why he did it.
I think a lot of cultures have something similar in that, you have all these stories, and then one day one guy says, "Hey man, let's not lose this. Let's
Yeah.
codify it. Let's just put
Yeah,
this
yeah.
in a book and keep it for posterity." A quick example would be in Hindu culture, we have 2 epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. So these are like massive poems that were actually passed down orally.
Yeah.
It was an oral tradition. And then somewhere down the line, some guy was like, "I can't remember all this shit. Let me write this down."
Yeah.
Somebody invented something called a pen. Let's use that.
Yeah.
And and thus we have something like this. So one of the challenges with Ramayana and Mahabharata is that because these are oral traditions, it mutates over time.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
And it is only after it is written down that it is finally set in stone.
Yeah.
But then all the mutations that happened over the many decades, centuries even, we don't know if it's true or not. So, and I noticed some interesting parallels in the Malay Annals too when I was reading it.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
One of the things that really struck me was that an interesting use of metaphor. In some of the stories, I'm struggling to remember. I think it was the one about Bukit Merah.
Okay.
The one about the swordfish.
The swordfish,
right? So there was a story so the chapter starts with this particular story, which is a small one, and then as the story progresses, then they talk about an actual war happening, and they used a phrase, the blood of these many people who died forever stained the soil of Singapore, which is very similar to something that they used the first, right?
Yeah.
And what I found interesting was that so I studied Sanskrit for about 3 years. I sucked at it. I'm not very good at it, but there are certain ways of using words. There are certain writing styles that were kind of similar in that there are many poems in Sanskrit where they have this story in the first. It's a small story which is like a fable and all that, but actually, it actually is kind of like the gist of what is actually happening, right? So it could be just an allegory. It's like, oh, a bird was flying and then somebody shot it down. Oh, so sad. And then the story is to the theme of somebody being destroyed and all that.
That's a really beautiful way of looking at it. It was something that I never actually thought about until I listened to your podcast. It was kind of like an eye opener for me. After that I was like trying to look into the books again to try to see whether I can find any of these similar stories. So
You're welcome, Hafiz.
yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, they could be. I mean, it's too fantastical. Many of the stories are too fantastical to believe, and they have to be allegorical in some sense. And I believe that is probably the way to look into most of the stories. Yeah.
And it's also similar with respect to when I read about the whole Lion City thing, right? So there's one particular line that struck me as interesting, where Sangil Uttama's minister, Sangil Uttama was like, "Hey, what the fuck is that thing?" Yeah. And then the minister was like, "Oh, I heard some stories about a divine being called a lion. Yeah, I think that lion must be it." And then he says something to the tune of, "Surely this land that can hold such a fierce and beautiful creature is fit, for someone like Sangil Uttama." And so what really struck me at the time was like, whoa. So the idea was that not about this creature being a lion, it's about, this lion is just probably supposed to mean something else. And lions have historically and universally been considered a symbol of monarchy, royalty, dominion, leadership, and all that. So essentially, I don't know, was the minister implying that Sangil Uttama, you're a lion, you don't need to live under your mother-in-law's purview, right? No, that's what I took away from it. I mean, because it just seems strange that Sangil Uttama had to send a messenger back to the kingdom of Bentan saying that
I'm not coming back.
And if you love me, you will send me elephants and people.
And I'm
it's
like, wow. Like funniest mojo in a Slil Island.
But I also do remember reading something to the tune of, it is an allegorical story in that, there was a prince, there was a person, possibly named Sangil Uttama too, but, over the years that story has been lionized, aggrandized. And essentially it's a story about someone breaking and finding their own path and, making a new kingdom and stuff like that. So it's all those things.
That's a takeaway I think we should look into. I mean, beyond the literal. Anyway, I think the description that the guy gave more closely resembles a tiger. He said it was a striped beast. It was red striped beast and white chest,
white breast, and
white
a
breast,
black head. But it wouldn't be too far from the truth.
Yeah, probably when a tiger is eating something, it's got blood on its face. It might be black,
Perhaps. Having said this, there's a Facebook page I follow called Urban Explorers Singapore, and they talk about the origin of the word Singapura. And they have an interesting take on it. This is probably outside the scope of this because I want to do another podcast episode about it, and I'll send you the link afterwards. But so they talk about Singapura, which probably means something else and all that. And then I put in the comments saying that perhaps it means a tiger because in Sanskrit it is quite common for people to use the word Singa or Simha for both lions and tigers, right? And you can see this in living languages now too, because Sanskrit was the progenitor for a lot of our Indian languages, right? So my home tongue is Malayalam. In Hindi, that I can speak and understand, it's quite similar. People constantly use the word Simha for both lion and tiger, despite the fact that tiger has its own, word. Like in Malayalam, it's Kadava. In Sanskrit, it's Yagra. But then when they say Simha, it could mean big cat. So I put a comment saying that perhaps Sangil Uttama said, "Hey, look, a big cat," and everybody just mistook it for a lion, right? And then the Urban Explorers guy replied saying that that's a great thought, but as it turns out, tigers were never around this particular region until the first tigers were sighted around the 17th or 18th centuries. So it wasn't probably likely that it saw a tiger, but I don't know,
You'll never know. I mean, it's interesting.
That was that. Sanskrit seems to be spread across the region, right? In fact, I don't know if I can show you this particular picture, but there's a picture of a script in the translation of the Malay annals that I'm reading. Okay. So the guy who translated this, I forget the author. He says that there's this particular script. There we go.
Oh, it's just
right. And this is when I see it first visually, it looks like Bengali.
Okay.
Right. But then on closer inspection, you can see that script was probably written with a stylus or something, because Sanskrit tends to have circular inscriptions.
Yeah,
but
this is very sharp. Yeah.
Right. So I'm like, holy fuck, this is Sanskrit. Sanskrit, of course, was kind of the Latin of its time. Yeah, there you go. So I'm like, man, and unfortunately my Sanskrit is not great. I don't know enough, and so I was hoping to reach out to someone who knew Sanskrit and we could read this, and probably there'd be certain metaphors or allegories that some British dude from the 18th century wouldn't know.
Yeah.
But somebody with that historical context or somebody who knows Sanskrit would probably get it.
Yeah,
That's right. Aside. I want to do this more once I get those responses.
Hopefully, I'll be waiting for that one. It'll be very interesting.
Thank you for that knowledge dump, Hafiz.
Yeah, you want. Came out of nowhere. It's no problems. I mean, I'm just happy to share. It's something that I'm just happy that I can find someone who's eager to try to learn about Singapore. And there's so much to learn and so much more. I mean, I'm sure you'll be able to with all the things that you've already gone through. I mean, with the Malay annals and all that other stuff. I'm sure you can surprise a lot of Singaporeans with what you already know.
Yeah, I mean, we have done that, my co-host and I, and then it's always gone to the effect of my other Singaporeans. Oh my gosh, not again!
Not again.
Just leave us alone.
I mean, hopefully, people won't be so apathetic about Singapore's history anymore.
History is never a popular subject, so
I mean,
as long as two people get to start asking questions because of this, I think it's a win.
It depends on the lens that you look at it.
Yeah. And my lens is that's not. Anyway, Hafiz, thank you so much for being part of this.
Thank you for having me.
And
thank you for the tea.
All good. So guys, once again, check us out on the various podcast apps like iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube. If you have a podcast app that you like, we are most definitely on it. And we'll see you until the next episode. Goodbye.